นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening. It's just 7 days until the full moon day in July. We call Asalaha Puja. The day after that is the first day of the annual 3-month range retreat. So it's a time when the monastic community go on retreat and prepare for that over the next few days. Tomorrow we have the ordination of 3 new monks and 2 novice monks. People who have expressed their aspiration to pursue the holy life, use the training provided by the Dhamma Vinaya, the monastic training that the Buddha left us, which is still largely intact in this day and age, even though it's a long time since the Buddha was alive. But the ways of training that began with the monastic tradition, began with the first monks, with the Buddha, we've inherited it. It's still with us today. And then in our modern era, we have our teacher, Luang Por Chah, who is known for his special skill in training monks, nuns, and lay practitioners. And we've inherited much from him as well. The way the monastery is set up, the way we practice as monks, novices, lay practitioners in the monastery, the routines, the practices, the training rules. Many of them we are following the way Ajahn Chah taught and trained his Sangha, his community, back in the day. The term they use in Thailand is Ko Wat Patibat, which means training rules and practices of the monastery. And although they're centered in the monastic discipline, the Vinaya, that the Buddha established, there's always some slight variation dependent on each monastery, each situation that monastics find themselves in. So such things such as some variation between monasteries maybe, like where how many group meetings you have, how many how the buildings are maintained, how you do certain activities in the monastery. There may be rules and guidelines that vary from monastery to monastery. But in general, the tone of the practice and the general way of practice won't vary that much between monasteries that still uphold the Vinaya as taught by the Buddha. In the retreat time, 3 months retreat, is a time where monastic Sangha study the Dhamma and the Vinaya and then practice particularly in a retreat situation. Not much travelling, not many other activities going on. The community has a lot more time to dedicate to the practice of, particularly of meditation, living simply, quietly in the forest and contemplating, developing wisdom, insight, and with a purpose. The purpose being to find peace, happiness, free the mind from stress and suffering. All of the monastic training and what we call the korvat, the ways and practices of the monastery, they're for that purpose, to help us understand better, to help us restrain, compose ourselves better, so that we can live more mindfully and with more insight and free our minds from the causes of suffering. No one else can do that for us. We have a general way of practice in the monastery or in any other monastery, but still it's up to each individual whether they are sincere in following that, following the rules, the ways of meditation, the ways of training. That has to be done voluntarily, sincerely, with a wish to train. So you commit to taking on training rules and practices. Sometimes even we go further than just the basic requirements of a Buddhist monk, basic rules. We have something called the Tonga Practices, the 13 Tonga Practices, which require an individual monastic to put forth more effort, be more patient in training themselves. So one of them is the practice of nesajika, for example. Not lying down at night to rest. This means only keeping to the 3 postures, standing, walking or sitting, but not lying down. And that takes a lot of effort because everyone from time to time will want to lie down to rest. Most people, every night you lie down to rest, to sleep. So if you suddenly cut that posture out, you can still rest leaning against a wall or a tree or a post, or just sitting where you are, but you don't get such a good rest, you don't get such delicious sleep in the sitting posture. So taking on that practice for any length of time, whether it's just one night, or a month, or many months, or a year, or whatever, that requires a lot of patience and endurance and commitment to train oneself. But the result is one gets a lot of effort coming up in the practice, maybe some clarity, some heightened levels of samadhi through all that effort. Depends on the person, a practice like that. Some people can practice not lying down the whole night. Their body is strong enough, their mind is willing to work with whatever emotions and distractions and sleepiness comes up. Other people find it difficult. Maybe it's not for them. And there's other ascetic practices monastics take on. Another common one is only eating food from one vessel. So you have your bowl, usually speaking, monastic will have a bowl. You only eat the food that you put into your bowl. So you don't have side plates or food in cups or other vessels, other containers. And generally you would only eat in one sitting. So at one time, once a day, you gather your food in your bowl and you just eat what's in your bowl. That may sound fairly straightforward on paper or in a talk like this, but if you practice it, There'll always be a day when you want to have something outside of your bowl. Maybe somebody offers the monastic community some kind of liquid food, like a soup, a warm soup on a cold winter's day, or some dessert that's liquid in its consistency, and you want to put it in some other dish. But if you're following this rule, you've taken on not to do that. So it'll bring up some doubt or resistance in your mind, or maybe put you in a bad mood even. That's what these practices do. You take on a particular practice, and if you train with it sincerely, then it will bring up challenges where you've got to work with your own mental defilements, cravings, attachments. But that's the purpose of the monastic training, is to give you some strength of mind and some skill, bring up effort, bring up all kinds of good qualities to help you train your mind to go further than just to let your mind always be ruled by the emotions, pleasure, displeasure, satisfaction, dissatisfaction, liking, disliking, which is what our mind is usually following, isn't it, if we're honest. Even if you're living out in the world, you've got job, responsibilities, family. You do what you want when you want, don't you? As much as you can. You sleep when you want to sleep. You eat what you want to eat when you want to eat it. You go here, you go there, according to your desires, your moods. In the monastery, you're training to go above your moods, rise above them, to go beyond the sort of normal conditioning process of the mind where you're seeking things that you like and trying to get away from what you don't like. You're developing much more strength of mind, equanimity, patience, using the monastic form, the monastic training to do that. So with food, you're developing mindfulness, equanimity around food, contemplating what the purpose of food is, what the right amount is to eat for a day, and watching how your mind may be affected by the kinds of food that you encounter, or the lack of food, or the lack of opportunity to eat at certain times when you feel hungry perhaps. All of that is food for contemplation. And the monastic training will expose it to you. How much you sleep, when you sleep, how much you eat, how much you talk. Maybe you're in the monastery, you're in a room or a kuti in the forest, and there'll be times when you actually crave to socialize. Other times you'll be the opposite. You don't want to meet anyone because you're in a mood. You don't want to talk to anyone, don't want to meet anyone. So even in a monastic setting, you'll see these dynamics. Your mind moves between wanting to do things, not wanting to do things. And sometimes you can indulge those moods, sometimes you can't. You have to just follow the routine or the rule or the practice that you've undertaken. But instead of just giving in to the moods, you're also learning to develop higher dhammas, and the ability to resist desire, say no to certain desires, to have enough mindfulness to do that, enough strength of mind, enough patience to do that. That takes training, takes practice. Learning how to compose yourself in different situations. This is something that most lay people don't understand because they've never lived as a monk in a monastery. But monks, we are always composing ourselves because we've got so many rules and guidelines to our practice. There'll be things that you can't do in certain situations, or things you should do in certain situations that a lay practitioner will probably never realize. Do's and don'ts, requirements, responsibilities, all kinds of things you're training in a monastery, in a monastic setting. But the idea is to help you be more composed, have more self-control, more self-awareness, to know your mind in different situations, to be more mindful and have more clear comprehension. Most of us, we come into the monastery or this kind of environment. Maybe we've done meditation retreats, learnt meditation with a teacher somewhere or in a retreat centre perhaps, which is a good start, a good introduction to the training of the mind, the training of body and mind in the Buddhist path. But often it's fairly limited, fairly short-term, and most meditation courses and retreats focus on particular techniques and styles of meditation. The monastery has that as well, but also you have many other practices and aspects to the life that are also part of the training. Obviously the practice of generosity, the giving of service and helping others, and then the receiving of help as well. The keeping of a level of moral integrity, we say, precepts, basic moral training, being composed and harmless in one's speech, one's actions. These are all going on in the monastery, and an outsider might not realize. Living in the forest, living in simplicity also. Living without money, just using a few simple possessions, not accumulating wealth as such. Living celibate changes your social life if you're celibate. We even say it, don't we? To live like a monk. The main thing that brings up in people's mind is celibacy. You don't go to parties. You don't go on dating apps. You're celibate. That's a whole practice in itself. So living in the monastery, you're learning to widen or broaden your practice of awareness and dealing with mental defilements, cravings, attachments, delusions and distractions that normally we may not even be aware of. In the monastery, they're highlighted. In the monastery, you go back to your kuti. Most of the time, you're on your own. Whatever mood you have, you're with that mood. Whatever you're thinking, feeling, it's very apparent to you. You can't just rush off somewhere to distract yourself in food or socializing or games, entertainments, whatever people use to change their mood or hide from their moods, hide from difficult things that they don't want to face, or just distract themselves from the challenges of daily life. You don't have a lot of that. You stay with your mood goes with you. If you walk through the forest back to your hut, it goes with you. You have to deal with that. But the way through is to train. Compose yourself on the outside, using the training rules and the practices, and that supports composing and developing more mindfulness and awareness on the inside. And you may notice where any stress or unhappiness comes from. It will come from you attaching and giving too much importance to a particular mood of frustration or anger or disappointment, frustrated desires, whatever. The quietness of the environment and the practice of mindfulness, the training rules will help you to see more clearly where your stress and suffering is coming from. Sometimes the Buddha would compare the human mind to like water. Yesterday I was in Melbourne walking, we were hiking along the Yarra River. We came to one place where there was a weir or a small waterfall, and on the high side of the weir the water was all very still, clear, and you might say beautiful in its natural way because it was still. And on the downside of the weir it was all stirred up. The water was all frothy and um, stirred up so much you couldn't see anything in there. It was stirred up, there's a lot of sediment, a lot of stuff swirling around. It made me think of what the Buddha said about the mind, like the mind is the same. When the mind becomes still and composed with mindfulness, you can see your own mind, you know it. You can see it clearly, you know whatever thought is arising, whatever your mood is, however you're feeling, what memories are coming up. You can know them when your mind is more still. But when it's all stirred up, then you feel like you're suffering. It's agitated, it's not content. Sometimes agitated so much you can't concentrate on what you're doing. If you're doing a job of work with an agitated mind, maybe you can't do that job very well. Can't concentrate. If you're agitated, you can't sleep at night. That's the water that's stirred up. Same thing, water that is all agitated, stirred up, whirling around, and water that is still, clear. It's the same thing, the same natural element, but in a different state. And our mind is like that. Every moment of every day our mind still has the quality of just knowing. It's aware, it knows. But when we let it get stirred up because we attach to different moods and thoughts, our worries, our desires, and then the frustration when we don't always get our desires met, it changes. The mind can be stirred up and then you can't see much, can't know much because there's so many thoughts whirling around. But when you practice mindfulness and restraint and composure, and then your mind becomes stiller, quieter, and you can see it, you can know it. So the monastic training is like that, is that the place, the environment, the rules, the guidelines, the schedules, all the different things we do are helping you to compose your mind so it becomes more still, quiet, peaceful. We know what the mind that is agitated is like because we've had that in the past, in life. That maybe is why we came to the monastery, looking for some peace, inner peace. But still, inner peace can't be just had, can't be just gained through desire or wanting it. You have to create peace or create the conditions for a peaceful mind through your practice. You have to train it. That stillness is won through effort, training our actions, training our speech, ultimately training the mind itself, using the ways of practice that the Buddha gave us and using the monastic environment. So we need to be patient and endure because your mind never, certainly in the beginning of the practice, it never does what you want. You want it to be peaceful, it's not. You want it to not have too many thoughts, but it has lots. You want it to settle down and it doesn't. You want it to give up different kinds of greed and craving, but they're still coming up in your mind. You want to give up anger and ill will, irritation, frustration, but it still comes up. Often the monastic practices will bring that up or heighten your awareness of your own moods to start with. So you have to be patient and be willing to work with your mind until it starts to settle down. And out of the peace, the clarity, you gain understanding that can help you. And in the long run, maybe the agitation doesn't return. Your mind is more still, more equanimous in many situations. Ajahn Chah used to say it's like a still forest pool. When the mind is still, like a still pool of water, then you see many wonderful, marvelous things. Because when you know your own mind and it becomes quieter, stiller, you see the truth of things. See the changing nature of the thoughts and moods and memories, feelings in the body, feelings in the mind. You see these things, but you see them with the light of wisdom, with the eye of wisdom, or the Dhamma eye. So you gain very clear insights which have a good effect on the mind. And when you have insight into the impermanent, changing nature of mental conditions, mental phenomena, that frees the mind from grasping at them with a sense of self. So your mind becomes more relaxed, more peaceful in itself. Because if you have a sense of self that you keep following, building up, getting lost in, that's not very peaceful. That's why we suffer, isn't it? Sense of me, mine, myself, sense of being a person. The still mind, the quiet mind, that sense of me has dispersed, it's gone quieter, it's not so prominent. So that mind is much clearer, more spacious. It's not so prone to agitation. More relaxed, more happy in itself. You can only experience that if you train, if you practice. So this period of the Ranger Retreat is a time to really put that to the test, to prove it. It's not something you can just want, something you have to practice and experience or know for yourself through your own efforts. So you have to be willing to practice, willing to put forth effort, be patient with the ups and downs. You have to be willing to go through the challenges, the moods, the happiness, the unhappiness, the frustrations of training a human mind. But we can do that because there's no one else who hasn't had to do that. Anyone who's experienced any kind of inner peace, awakening, enlightenment, they've done that. Other human beings can do it, therefore we can do it. Humans can train themselves. We can practice. And we have to remind ourselves of that, otherwise we might just give up, get so fed up, frustrated training the mind that you just want to give up. It's not uncommon for a monk halfway through the Ranger Retreat, the mind is all over the place, not peaceful, not happy, start thinking of going back to the world. Oh, if I just went back, found myself a nice place to live, found myself a partner, got myself a job, have some money, I'd have the independence to do what I want, go where I want. The mind can be very deceptive, full of all kinds of fantasies, painting all kinds of desirable pictures of how life could be somewhere else. The grass is always greener on the other side. That's just another symptom of the lack of peace in the mind. The agitated mind will do that. It'll look for fantasies and create fantasies to get away from the agitation. So you have to remind yourself and keep practicing, keep going back to the practice of mindfulness, patience, putting forth effort. And it's through effort that we overcome the stress, the suffering of the mind. As Luang Por Chah said, nobody ever got enlightened by just lying around doing nothing. We have to practice. We have to put forth effort. It's out of the effort that the good results will come. The stillness of mind, the clarity, the insight, the understanding. So I'll leave you with those reflections tonight and wish you all well.